All right, good day, everybody. This is Eric Oldenburg with Griffeye. I have with me today Tristan Oliver, and today we're going to be doing a webinar on tips and tricks, basically how to get the most out of your digital media investigations. Now, this is a recorded webinar that we're doing after we had some technical issues with this webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Tristan Oliver. Tristan's with me today. He's retired from a agency in the UK, and he did child sex abuse investigations for approximately 16 years. So, Tristan?
Hello, good day, everybody. As Eric says, my name's Tristan Oliver. I was a computer forensic examiner from the early 2000s in the UK, where, like everybody else, probably a lot of my work involved child exploitation cases. So I was involved in that. Later in my service, towards the end, the last 6 years, I specialised in high-risk child exploitation cases. So very much just focusing on that type of work. Just a quick bit of history. In the very early days of my computer forensic examinations, there were no tools, as far as I'm aware, for doing any sort of grading or viewing of images. We have plenty of forensic tools to look at pictures. But it was very difficult in those days to actually collaborate and share between users. And in the very early days, we used to meet up regionally in the UK and share CDs containing hash sets. And that's how we first sort of started in the very early days. Obviously, a big jump on now to the likes of software like Griffeye, where we have local, regional, and national databases to all collaborate on our work. So that's a little bit of a background about me.
Excellent.
Okay, so I think, Eric, the first thing we're going to talk about is a strategy.
Yeah, some strategies before we begin. So the things we're going to talk about today are, first of all, it's important to make sure that when you sit down in front of your investigation, you have the proper strategy in mind, depending on what type of investigation it is. And Tristan's going to talk a little bit about that with you guys today. We're also going to go into setting up the software and creating cases. So it's important to make sure that you have the software set up so it's optimized to get the most out of the tool, to get your files processed as quickly as possible, and to make sure you have things turned on so that you're going to let the tool do the work that it's designed to do and help minimize the work that you have to do manually. And then we're going to talk about working within the software. There's a lot of hidden features and tips, and there's all kinds of little keyboard shortcuts and stuff we're going to talk about to help you speed up your working with the interface, basically. And then we'll talk a little bit about a new feature when it comes to reporting, where we can now report on specific images. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some workflow tips and conclude it with, we normally would conclude it with a question and answer, but since this is being recorded, we can just save that for when we do this live. All right, without further ado, we're going to go into the software. And this is a case that's already been created, but before we talk about that, Tristan is going to talk a little bit about strategies, depending on what you're facing in your upcoming investigation.
Okay, yes, thanks, Eric. So there's a couple of sort of obvious situations that we may face in these type of cases. One of the types of cases we dealt often were very much time critical cases. So those are cases where potentially we have a suspect in custody, we've arrested somebody, we're looking for evidence fairly quickly, we've got custody time critical issues. There may be cases where that are referred to you where we've got child protection issues, immediate child protection issues, where the speed of getting to that critical evidence is paramount in the case. And sometimes it may be simply a case that a suspect has been arrested, you don't really know what the situation is, and you're looking for something to confirm to you that it's a positive case, it is as you think it is at an early stage. So with those type of cases where there's time critical, we very much need to be thinking about a very much proactive approach, in my view. And that is getting to the evidence as fast as we possibly can. So we're not particularly worried about all the non-pertinent, the ignorable pictures at that stage. We're very much interested in, let's get in and find the actual, or get a good overview as quick as we can of what the actual, the crux of the case is. So in those cases, we're going to be using the GID-based databases very quickly, potentially to find relevant material from our categorized material, either locally or nationally. There's other things we can do, for example, using the Griffeye CSA brain to process images and show us stuff that has that the algorithm in the brain has identified that appears as we would think to be indecent pictures of children, etc., etc. We may be looking at location data, so using GPS data very quickly to home in on photographs that were only taken in a certain area. Maybe we're looking at stuff that's the EXIF data from cameras. If we have a camera that's been seized from either a victim or offender or anything else, then again, those are areas we can home in very quickly and find what we're looking at. The other type of strategy potentially we have is and perhaps we deal with it in a different way, is cases where it may be a straightforward or apparently a straightforward possession case. Somebody's downloaded some pictures. It's not particularly high priority. We're not dealing with live abuse or live images that hit the stage. And they tend to go on the back burner. So potentially when we deal with those cases, a different strategy is to try and eliminate and get rid of as many as the non-pertinent or ignorable files as we can, and then focus on going through and grading other images. So it's in my view, it's quite important before you sit down at this, before you just start going through pages and pages of pictures, is to actually have an idea of what you're trying to achieve and have a strategy.
Excellent. That's before you even sit down. It's all about mindset, right? Get yourself, depending on how you're going to be attacking the situation, is going to dictate how you're going to set up the case initially. Would you agree with that, Tristan?
Absolutely. Completely, yes, sir.
Excellent.
Yes, Eric.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about getting the tool set up correctly. And just again, because this is tips and tricks, I am not going to be going into detail on a lot of things. This is just to make you aware of some of the features and some of the things that you can do that you might not be aware are available. You're probably going to hear some stuff today that is that you already know about. But again, for the broader audience, I just want to go through everything to make sure that you guys are aware of these little tricks and such. And then Tristan, again, feel free to jump in. Anything I miss or anything you would like to add, please just let everybody know. Excellent. So very first thing, after you install the tool, you want to go to the overview window, which is this one right here. And if you go to your settings button, this is the main program settings. Now, the main program settings are where you can set up a lot of different things. As you can see, databases, categories, bookmarks, things like that. But what's of importance here is your folders. So if you go all the way down to your folders view, we got our temporary path. The tip and trick here is to set this temporary path to the fastest drive in your machine. So if you have an SSD, an NVMe solid state device, whatever's the fastest one, point your temporary folder to that. It's the folder that Griffeye is going to be using to doing all its processing. Now the caveat to that is just make sure that you realize this folder may contain child abuse content. So don't put it on a drive unless you're sure that drive is okay to accept child exploitation material. And that's the setup one. Another thing, once you have your temporary folder set, notice up here in the upper left-hand corner, a lot of people don't realize that the user manual is actually built into the tool, and it is all tabbed out. This is a very comprehensive manual. So everybody, please RTFM first. If you have a question, this is where you go. We get questions all the time. Where's the manual? I don't have a copy of the manual. Yes, you do. It's built into the software. So use that as a resource. Now, right underneath that is our keyboard shortcuts overview. There are a ton of keyboard shortcuts with Griffeye Analyze. You just have to go and use them. And once you start using the shortcut keys, and we're going to go into which ones are pretty useful in a little while, but once you start using them, you'll realize that just by using some keyboard shortcuts, you can actually speed up your investigations even more. People are used to using the mouse and the mouse wheels, but once you really start digging into this tool and you have large amounts of work to do, make sure you're using your shortcuts efficiently. That's another little tip to have there. Also, I'm going to go back to the overview view. I wanted to let you guys know, if you have a support question, if the program does something that that messes up, or it's buggy and it's causing you a problem, we want you to email support@griffeye.com. But when you do so, the first thing they're going to ask you for is your log file. And everyone wants to know, where do I get the log? Where do I get the log? The easiest way to find the log is right under here where it says View Log Folder under your settings. So if you click View Log Folder, it'll come up with this window that's going to have all the different log files dated, whichever date you're using. This one with no date is the one from today, and then it gets dated as they go back. So whatever day the situation happened, make sure you attach that log file to your customer support request. All right, now that we've talked about getting the program set up, let's discuss the interface. When you're categorizing files, when you're using this tool to look at visual data, real estate is of utmost importance. It's all about location, location, location. No, just kidding. It's all about maximizing your screen real estate for whatever work you're doing. So a couple things you can do. Here's a tip. Up in the upper right-hand corner by your close button is this little up arrow, auto hide ribbon. You can select a different selection. As it is now, it's showing everything. But if I hit show tabs only, notice that it takes everything away. I can still get to the information. If I click on it, it drops down the tab, very similar to a Microsoft Office program. But that's going to give me a little bit more real estate. Also know, if you're using multiple monitors, you can undock whatever window you want. And the easiest way to undock anything is to go down to the tab at the bottom and grab it and drag it out however you want. What I recommend, in the way that I used to do it, and Tristan, you probably did it very similar to me, is I would pull out my thumbnails window, and I would make, I had a multiple monitor setup. I would pull out my thumbnails and I'd fill up the screen, my main monitor with the highest resolution, most real estate, with my thumbnails. And then I would put my info panel and my filters panel on a separate monitor. That way my entire screen is the thumbnail view. And I can just go and work through it that way, and I can refer to these if I want. Now, what's really cool is let's say this is a setup that I like and I want to use it every time. Another tip is to go to your View tab, and under Quick Layouts, you have the ability. Now, there's a bunch that they've set up in here for you. You can go through here and take a look at these. But what's cool is if I like this layout, I can just click Save, and I'll say Save Layout As. And you can see I already have one in there called Info Floating. And I will call this Filters and Info Undocked, spelled incorrectly, way incorrectly. Now, if I reset my user interface, clears it back again. Now, if I wanted to load that really quickly, I just go to Quick Layouts, User Defined, Filters and Info Undocked, and boom, there's my view that I have. Get your interface customized to the way you want it. That's what's great about this tool, is you can design it however you want for your purposes. And let me reset the user interface. I'm going to go back to View, and let's now talk about keyboard shortcuts. So when the most amount of work you're going to be doing is going to be in the thumbnail view, because this is where it's going to display all the data that you're interested in. One of the keyboard shortcuts, like we mentioned before, is a lot of people like to scroll down with their scroll wheel, but a keyboard shortcut that's going to paginate it for you, basically, is to just simply use the page down key. Page down, page down, page down, page down. Or page up, and that's going to page you up or down one whole set of images. And you can see the kind of scroll wheel going over here on the corner. You can now, if you want to scroll through pages of thumbnails, so I have 1 to 1,000. There's a total of 3,000, which means I've got 3 sets of 1,000 images per thumbnail. If I wanted to scroll through to the next page, I just hit the Control and then the right or left arrow. So I just hit Control, right arrow, and you can see at the bottom it's taking me to the 3rd set of thumbnails and back to the first one. Now you can change the amount of thumbnails you have per page by going up to your thumbnail setting button under Appearance and changing it. Tristan, what do you feel is a good maximum amount of thumbnails you should have per page?
Yeah, Eric, this is a good point. You know, sometimes you think if you've got a very powerful computer, well, let's knock it up to 5,000, 10,000 per page. The problem is that you know, the software is then dealing with lots and lots of pictures. It does take longer to render. It takes longer to select stuff. So I found 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, maybe up to 3 or 4 is really the most. Partly because the human, your attention span of humans. If you're dealing with things in compartments 1,000 at a time, it's much easier. But if you're scrolling through a page with 10,000 pictures, it's going to take you 15 minutes every page. I personally feel that from experience that it's much better to do it in little compartments. It's easier to keep your concentration and keep focused on what you're actually trying to do.
Excellent. Very good. So while we're talking about the thumbnail settings and we're in here, the other thing that you can do is if I want to change the size of these thumbnails, I can go in here and I can go to appearance and I can zoom this in and out. I can get them bigger, but when I try to zoom smaller, you'll see that it doesn't go any smaller. And the reason that is because these thumbnail header icons, I can turn these on or off. I can turn the ones I'm not using off by selecting thumbnail header icons and just grabbing the ones that I don't want. I don't really care that there's a thumbnail header icon for video that has sound. And for some of the apps, I don't really need to see keyword matching or whatever. So as I turn those off, you'll see it creates a blank space. Now I can actually make my thumbnail smaller. But to go a shortcut for that is I can just hold down the control key and use my mouse wheel now. And now I'm zooming in and out with my mouse wheel to get to the screen exactly how I want it. Any other things with the thumbnail view, Kristen, you can think of at this point? I'm going to talk about a couple shortcuts, but
no, I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
It's optimizing. It's very much about optimizing. The screen you've got and getting as many pictures on there as you can at the size that's comfortable for you. What my experience is that it's very. You can have the thumbnails of the images, the static image, the still images, you can generally have those a lot smaller and still recognize the content than perhaps you can with videos. So you have to, when you move to videos, you tend to have them a little bit bigger to look at the snapshots through the video. So again, it's finding what's comfortable with you that is small enough to deal with things as fast as possible, but not so small that you're missing detail of things that actually are important.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I would always do is I'd make sure I would have my thumbnail view set up so that I can see what's going on in the picture without having to open it up in the file view, because then I have to jump back and forth between interfaces. Now, one quick thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is what's called active zoom. And by default, if you just hold down your shift key, it'll actually zoom in right in the thumbnail view, depending on whatever image you're looking at. That's a way to get more detail, is zoom in without actually flipping over to the file view, which is kind of cool. But let's say you want to look at something in the file view. That's the space bar. And now I'm in the file view. And one thing that is kind of clunky is if I want to go back and look at more pictures, or I want to look at the next picture, I got to go back to the thumbnail view and then select the next picture and then go back to the file view and look at it. But what you can also do, there's a keyboard shortcut to navigate through images right within here, and that is by holding down Control Shift and then using the arrow keys. I'm doing right arrow and it's just arrowing me through the images. Now I'm just arrowing back. That again, that's Control Shift and then an arrow key, either direction. Back to the thumbnail view. And then Tristan, you had a couple things about Shift and Enter you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, it's what I've noticed I found pretty much with Griffeye, if you can sit and print off the keyboard shortcuts and you can use those. But pretty much within Griffeye, if you hold down Shift, Enter, or Control on anything within the interface, they're generally throughout the interface set up to do something useful. So as you've just said, if you highlight a picture and hit Enter, it does something useful. It shows you. In that case, it does a similarity search, but it generally, those particular functions, the Shift, Control, and Enter keys on the keyboard, if you don't remember anything else, they probably do something useful no matter where you are in the interface.
Excellent. Very good. So one other thing I want to talk about is is in the interface wise is your right click menu, your context menu. Right click, guys. It gives you access to all kinds of stuff, all your intelligence menus. If you forget how to bookmark a file, just right click. And what's really cool is the developers have put on here, it shows you what the keyboard shortcut is for each one of these. So for example, this says intelligence bookmarks, but I can quickly get to that a couple different ways. I can go up here and click on bookmarks, or I can hit the B key on the keyboard and it'll bring up my bookmark dialog. So just use that right click. There's a lot of cool features in there. Don't forget that that is there and available for you. All right, so let's jump over to, I want to talk about a couple things in the interface that some people aren't aware of. One of them is the image comparer. And what that is a tool that allows you to bring two pictures up at the same time. Kind of like the file view, but you get to see both to compare them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these two beach scenes right here. And all you do is you select which is going to be the file you want on the left. So I've selected the file. I go up to the top, hit select left side. And then I click the next one I want to compare it to. And then when I click select right side, it'll pop up this dialog that allows me, and I'm just using my mouse wheel to zoom in and out, but I can, now I can compare two pictures together if I want to, which is a pretty cool feature for victim ID work. There's been some requests to be able to do this with video that is now in the hands of the developers. So hopefully we'll see something with that in the future. Another thing that people aren't aware of is that when you do exports and things like that, sometimes you lose track of your original evidence. So the way the tool works is it is designed to resolve to the actual evidence file. So every time you open a file in the file view, you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner it says original file. That means it's going to your evidence and it's pulling up that file. Well, oftentimes cases get moved, evidence gets moved, and you'll lose that original evidence. And if that happens, if you get any errors when you go to export, for example, if you go to do a NCMEC submission, it says there's a problem locating files from the case, they may have been moved, you want to open the function to locate them. I'm going to say no, because I want to show you where that function is. And that's on the case data tab at the top of the ribbon, and it's change file location. So if I select that, you'll notice that it cannot resolve all these folders because it looks like my evidence has changed. So how do I fix this? I go up to folder, I'm going to select the highest red X that I can. That's where the problems start. And I'm going to hit select or replace selected node. And when I do that, I just have to point to the evidence, the correct folder. So I'm going to say folder X instead of folder. You can see now it can resolve all the evidence. And I just hit close and save changes. And we're good to go. And for posterity, I'm just going to click save to make sure that I've saved all my changes. So realize that is where you would go. It's case data to change any file locations for evidence that might be missing.
Can I just jump in there, Eric? Just to add to that, what's important to remember in the interface is what you see in the thumbnail view there are images that have been rendered into the case database. So the moment you go out back to the original picture, okay, it's going back to the original source and it's displaying the original source. So if you have a 20 or 30 meg picture and you then go and view it as an individual file, you can the file detail, it's now going to render that individual file real time. So you need to remember you're looking at thumbnails here. So often a lot of people get confused. You can see everything's working fine in thumbnails, but it's not until you go to play a video to look at a picture in file view that then you get problems, and then you go back to the file location. But this also is relevant all the way through the interface. So if you're exporting, if you're creating a report, if you're exporting to some external database, maybe the K database or NCMEC or anything like that, if Griffeye cannot see the path to the original file, although you can see it in thumbnails, those reports and those exports are not going to work. It has to be able to see the original file. The thumbnails is just to speed up the interface whilst we're working through it.
Yes, that's correct. The thumbnails are actually generated by Analyze when it processes the case. So these thumbnails are all pre-extracted, pre-built. So that's why when you can look at the files in the thumbnail view and maybe not the file view if you can't see the original evidence. Excellent. All right, so talking about cases, one thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is you can actually open up a second workspace or a third, depending on how strong or powerful your computer is. Now, I don't recommend opening up any more than 2 cases, but if you have a really fast, nice forensic machine, you certainly can. But all you do is go to the overview window and select new workspace. When you do that, you'll have a second tab opened up for you. Now it says what case do you want to open up. It basically kicks me back, and I want to open up this case called Traveler Photos. So now I have 2 cases open in the same instance, and what's interesting about that is what I can do is I can actually select a case, and if I use that right click we talked about, I can go to search, and I can similar images in other cases. I can actually do a similarity search across cases, which is kind of cool. If you want to load up, one of the use cases for that is you have a search warrant. You want to load up all the search warrant files into one case, then you can just individually run this similarity search across to see if your bad guy's case has the same pictures or any imagery that he's taken within the house. That's a pretty cool thing that you can do. The other thing that people aren't aware of is you can create a temporary case. And in order to do that, a temporary case, the use case for that would be you have a, what I used to use it for is when I would get a cyber tip, or I would have I'd get a cyber tip with 8 or 10 images, and I wanted to check them to see if they're in my database, if they're already known images, if someone's seen them before, that type of thing. I would just take the folder with my cyber tip in it and just drag and drop my evidence to my temporary case. All you do is you have, and unfortunately you have to do drag and drop. So I would unmaximize Analyze and then find my folder and just drag it to a blank thumbnail view. You have to be in the thumbnail view. And when I release it, it says you want to create a temporary case or a new case. I just want to look at this real quick. Now, when you run temporary case, it's going to process the case with the same settings that you processed the case for last time. So the last time you ran a case, if you ran camera forensics and all kinds of other stuff like face detection, the Griffeye brain, it's going to run all that in your temporary case. So just realize that. So now it's finished and it brought in my files. And as you can see, case information, hey, I've got a match on one of my files and I can see it real quick. Pictures and videos came in. Now, when I'm done with my temporary case, all I do is click X. It says you sure want to close it? Yes, I do. And I'm back to my original case.
Sorry, can I just jump in, Eric? The great advantage with that, of course, is if you've been provided, as Eric says, provided with some pictures, some illegal pictures or whatever, by creating a temporary case, you're keeping separate from your main case file. So you can be absolutely certain you're not accidentally going to include pictures that you've been sent by somebody else and not actually come from the source evidence file. You're keeping them very, very separate within the case. You're keeping them separated, so you can't accidentally report on, for example, illegal files that have been sent by a third person. You can just use them for comparison purposes and then keep them very separate from your case.
Yeah, absolutely. You can create a temporary case, bring in your search warrant photos if you want, or the photos you want to compare, and then run that similarity across. And then when you're done, just delete out your temporary case, and it's gone, and it has not affected your main case. Excellent. All right, now let's talk about getting your databases set up and your GID. So the GID is the Griffeye Intelligence Database, and that's where all your files are going to be matched against for intelligence purposes. Now, as you can see here, I have a local GID, and I have a GID that I'm sharing out externally, and then I have a GID that I am connected to that is in Antarctica. Actually, it's in a laptop on my other desk here, but for our purposes, it's the Antarctic Police Service that I'm a member of their fraternal order. So we're going to go, first of all, go back to the local GID. Before I do that, I want to let you know, if you hit this edit button, you can actually reprioritize your GIDs. So if you have a GID, a particular one you want to check it against, before it checks it against the other ones, again, it's going to prioritize based on GIDs. You can reorder them just by drag and drop. Likewise, if I go into a GID, I'm in my local GID, I can click the edit button and I can do the same thing. I'm going to prioritize this. I wanted to check all my national databases first, and then I have my local Oldcastle PD databases below that. So for example, I want my Project Vic stuff up at the top here. So I've hit the edit button and I can just simply click it and drag it up to where I want it. So I'm going to start with Interpol ICSI and then Project Vic. And that's the Project Vic non-pertinence. And now I'm going to drag this up and boom, there we go. So I've got Interpol, ICSI, Project Vic, and then NSRL. That's one tip and trick I wanted to give to you guys as well. Have a large non-pertinent database available to you. And you'll see why in a minute when we talk about case creation. But your National Software Reference Library has that NIST, which is a bunch of good, rich, non-pertinent files. So get those You want your your national files, your national hash sources above your local ones. That's another trick for you. So I'm going to unedit. So now that we've, and make sure that you've got your databases populated with rich intelligence. And again, remember, we can share GIDs. So you can, this intelligence is from a completely different computer in a completely different part of the world. But I can still check all my files against it. Now, while we're speaking of the GID, it is important before you process a case to make sure your GID status down here has a checkbox on it. And when you hover over it, it's going to show you everything's good to go. If you have a red circle and a slash and you start to process evidence, it's going to try to connect to whatever GID is disconnected at the time to match, and it's going to really, really slow down your case processing. So make sure everything is in order before you process a case. And then let's talk about case creation. So when you're going to create a case, a couple things. We already discussed how to do a temporary case. And now we're going to talk about considerations when you create a full case. First of all, with the Lace Carver integration, you have the ability to use it for physical media or forensic images. So if I bring up a forensic image, for example, that I want to bring into this case, it's going to ask me if I want to import the forensic image, which is using the standard Griffeye import engine, or if I want to carve with Lace. And that's going to fully process everything. If I select that, it's going to allow me to put things to my case folder or another location if it's a large one. Now, I want to talk for a second about carving. Actually, I want Tristan to talk for a second about these carving modes and exactly probably the best way to handle this.
Okay. Looking at those then, so we've got the key difference really is between intermediate and fast. Sorry, intermediate and fast. So fast is basically just looking at file extensions only. So there's no signature analysis going on there at all. It's relying purely on the file signature, which is not particularly good forensic practice because potentially we end up with files. If somebody renames a file extension, potentially we're going to miss something. So the intermediate actually looks at the file signature, but it also looks at the MIME, the headers and footers to see whether they actually compare with what they expect. So a JPEG will have a certain header, etc., and a certain footer. So that's the key difference between those two. The last one, complete, in effect is exactly the same as intermediate. The difference is that if you select complete, what the software will try and do is it will carve a file, for example, a JPEG, and then see if it can open it without some error or some sort of crashing going on. So whilst that may, to an extent, cut down on the amount of files that are being imported, it does take a lot longer. It adds a considerable amount of time, but in actual fact, what you achieve from that, I'm not entirely sure what the benefit is. So I personally have always used intermediate, and the advanced options at the bottom give you some more.
I would agree as well, because the intermediate setting is going to carve all the files. It's going to do signature analysis and carve the appropriate files, but it's not going to try to open anything. The reason I don't want it to exclude files it can't open is we've all had investigations where there's a JPEG that's corrupted. You see the image about halfway through, there's a pixel flip, and then everything below it is garbage. I want to see that picture, so I want to make sure that that comes in. If I select complete, it may exclude it because it says, hey, that file is corrupt. So I don't want to have that happen. Excellent. So just remember that you have the ability to, if you have the Lace Carver integration, you have the ability to switch to that, and it's going to handle the processing of the file and then bring it right in. And what it's doing is it's actually creating a JSON, like a VIX JSON package in your case folder, and it automatically brings it in. So it's actually pretty cool. So another thing that I wanted to highlight about bringing in cases is the See for All XML button. Now realize you can bring in not only See for All exports from the carving engine, but you can now bring in Celebrite exports as well. And the way you would do that is just the same way. It's going to create two different files, one for pictures, the C for P, and then one for videos, the C for M. And the way it's doing that is let me pull this up for you real quick. I wanted to show you the right here. So what you would do is you would open up an extraction in Physical Analyzer, and then you'd go over to, you'd select your images or images first and then videos, and then you'd go up to export and Griffeye format. That's going to create that CFR all XML file. And then once you're done with that, it's going to ask you where do you want to save it. So you just put it out in a folder called images and hit OK. Now it's created that package. That's how you get that out of Physical Analyzer. So you can look at cell phone extractions within this tool.
I would even say, Eric, in my view these days, that there's very little reason now when you're dealing with cases where you're seizing computers, laptops, tablets, iPads, Samsung tablets, phones, everything else. There really is little reason now, if you're dealing with cases that involve indecent pictures of children or anything where images or videos are important. In my view now, everything should be extracted from all those devices and pulled into one place. There really is little point somebody that's examining a mobile phone, scanning down through pages and pages of photos and pictures, that you're looking at the same photos from a backup that's been extracted from their computer or something else. My view is bring absolutely everything together into the interface from all the devices you have and deal with them all centrally, all at one time.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about source ID. So source ID is a concept that's within Griffeye Analyze, and the tip or trick that I want to convey to you guys is that if you bring in an image or a folder, any piece of evidence, you assign it a source ID. The source ID is important because it's going to identify that evidence in your summary report. So when you do a summary report, it's going to report whatever you call the source ID. So it'll break everything up by source ID, which is cool. But what I want to convey to you is you can add multiple items to one source ID. An example is you seize a desktop computer that has a OS drive, and it's got a storage drive and maybe a 4-disk RAID or something in that. And you don't want to have each individual drive appear as an individual evidence item in here. What you would do is you just assign it the same source ID. So for this example, I'm going to say instead of a desktop, it's a laptop. I can assign it to this HP laptop source, and then any file that is found within that source, I can filter to because it's just that source ID. So you could potentially filter to, say, one computer, but you know that it's got 4 different evidence items in it. It's just a way to get your, to organize the data within your case. And once you have that source ID, you can actually filter by source ID. So instead of having to filter by each individual evidence item, you could filter by just the source. So try to use that, set that up in a way that's going to be beneficial to you. So I would just go and add this, or I would say I'm going to add it to whatever existing source, or I could create a new one. So I'm going to click Add, and then the other things I want to talk about. On your import settings, another tip is that Griffeye Analyze does handle document and text files. By default, it's not checked, but it will handle them. It's not going to pull any imagery out of any documents, but you can view the documents within the tool. If you want to extract imagery, pictures embedded into PDFs and that type of thing, that's something that you want to process with LACE, because LACE, the carver, will go into documents and it will extract all the imagery. So just be aware that that is available to you. And then the other thing I want to talk about is on our exclude filters. And Tristan, if you want to discuss this a little bit, the importance of exclude filters and how you use them.
Yeah, for sure. So where we're talking about files that somebody, or we're confident somebody has categorized as non-pertinent or ignorable or whatever you call them, then if we're happy with those, then there really is absolutely no point spending lots of time processing them and bringing them into the interface. So the first option on the top of the screen there under GIDs and hash databases is we can exclude files that are already categorized as non-pertinent. So those can be non-pertinent in any of our databases within the GID. So it's going to pick that up, and basically it's going to identify that, it's going to hash the file, recognize that the hash matches, and it will simply not bring it into Griffeye. The more we can do to not bring data in that we know about, or when we're happy that we know about, the better, the faster our work's going to be.
Okay.
And again, the second option at the bottom is excluding files with a match against a certain database. So I personally like to have an NSRL database of trusted files. So I will select the NSRL database because everything in there. And remember, the NSRL now also, not only does it include all PC software, you can also download iOS hash sets and also Android hash sets as well. So I create in my GID, I've got Android, iOS, and all software. I think it's post 2001 or something like that.
So basically what you're saying is any non-pertinent databases you have, we want to select, correct? And then bring those in, or excuse me, exclude those, yeah?
Exclude those if they're from sources like NSRL, all the iOS, all the imagery and the all the icons and everything associated with iOS and Android. When you're dealing with mobile phones, you're immediately going to get rid of an awful lot of stuff. You're not even going to process it.
Right. So excellent point. But what Tristan did mention, and I want to touch on a little bit more, make sure you trust your non-pertinent database. If you're not sure that it's actually non-pertinent files, you probably don't want to exclude them on the way in, right? Because we don't want any false positives that are swept up in the non-pertinent that you never ever see. So that's a consideration you might have when you're going to exclude files. The other consideration is that it's going to affect your file counts. If the amount of files that are found in the device is an important important for reporting, you definitely want to bring in all the files that you can. But if not, like Tristan said, it's all about minimizing the amount of files you have to go through. Because, I mean, what are we looking at, Tristan? We're looking at minimum of like make 100,000 files for, I've had cell phones that have hundreds of thousands of files on them, just a phone. And storage capacities are huge anymore. And
again, Mac operating systems have a considerable number of files. Apple Mac stuff. It's
yeah. So I also want to talk a little bit about the what we call the rule of 50, bringing in imagery that is smaller than, actually excluding imagery, because again, this is all our exclude options, anything smaller than 50 pixels or 50 bytes. And the reason we suggest that is most files that are that small, you wouldn't be able to actually identify a person from that file, so it's not going to be good for victim ID purposes. And photo DNA, one of the matching technologies that we use in this tool, doesn't work on any files smaller than 50 pixels, 50 bytes. So that's also an option for you as well. And next is our after import processing. Now, just the tip I wanted to bring up for this is you don't necessarily have to run all this ahead of time. If you want to speed up your processing of your case, you can run apps individually in the interface later on. So realize that is also consideration. And one thing I forgot to mention, I'm going to go back to my file import options. If you want to speed up your video processing, which I know is can be very time consuming, you can undo frame extraction. Now, when you do that, Griffeye Analyze is not going to be able to display for you a nice thumbnail of the 64 frames that it has extracted, but it will speed up your processing. You can also uncheck things that you aren't interested in when it processes, because every one of these adds a little bit of processing time to your initial case processing. And then I'm going to cancel this because we're not really going to create a case. Another thing that I wanted to, another tip or trick I wanted to show you is underneath the new case button, you may have seen this, it's add files to current case. So you can bring in additional evidence items. And let's say you wanted to add an additional item to your case. It just asks you where to do it, and you can add it to an existing source, which is really cool. Now realize you can't remove evidence sources from Analyze, but you can add them to the case if you want to.
Can I just add something there, Eric?
Absolutely.
Whilst you're on the add files and the folder, and one of the really useful things that I found with being able to add a folder is you'll notice down there that we don't have the option to add the source as a zip file. Now, if you're dealing with, for example, a proprietary NAS network attached storage, or maybe you've got a somebody's profile off a network share or something like that, you couldn't actually go and image it in a normal forensic image way. But perhaps you've been able to create or one of the ways I like to do was create a zip file of the contents of, for example, the NAS or a network share with files in. The advantage with the zip file, of course, is it will take all the original metadata of the files, the times and dates and everything, and store those securely in the zip. And then, of course, what I used to like doing was to put all of those, anything like that. So if I had a NAS, a Buffalo NAS drive or something like that, that I couldn't actually image and read the file system, but I could access through the web interface, I'd zip up the contents of that. I call the zip the item number or the source name of the Buffalo drive, put it into a folder, and then add the folder. So the folder then will be added into the case. For example, I would call the folder the Buffalo drive. I would put the zip file inside. But of course, when Griffeye goes to look in the folder, what it's going to find is a compressed archive, and it will extract all the contents of the compressed archive. And it's a very, very good way of keeping all the metadata, the original metadata about files, all the current times and dates without changing it. If you just did it as a folder, of course, the metadata, you couldn't secure it. But being within a zip file, it's secured within the case. And then generally then when you go and look in the grid view and look at all the times and dates, they are as they were on the original device.
Excellent. That's a very good way to deal with zip files as well, because it's going to extract them from the beginning. Very good. All right, let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk about the grid view, and I know a lot of people don't use the grid view, but it's very handy for searching. If you want to search for things within this tool, there's lots of ways to do it, but grid view searching is pretty cool. One of the things a lot of people do is they'll if they're searching for a particular file name, they'll switch to the grid view, go up to file name, and the first column is blank. This is where I'm going to perform my search. So I want to see all the files that start with the word photo. And as you can see, boom, here's all my results. That's great. But hey, this doesn't start with photo. It has photo in it. So the tip here is this little operand right here, you can change it. If I click on it, I can change this to lots of different things, but the one I want to switch it to is begins with. So I just want the pictures that begin with photo. And now as you see, as I scroll down, every one of my results begins with that word photo. So just realize you can change these operands if you want. That's kind of a cool tip for the grid view. Now, let's talk about categorization and some techniques that are going to help improve your categorization speed. And Tristan will talk about it a little bit. But before we get started with categorizing, I want to talk about processing with your brain. So your Griffeye brain, your CSA identifier, and your object detection, if you run those plugins while you process your case, and again, before I forget, I just want to switch over to the case data tab and show you that this is where you would rescan all your apps individually if you decided not to run them on the initial process. So realize that, and you could also rescan against any plugins. But what I wanted to talk about was your CSA brain. If you're it's all about minimizing your exposure to the material, right? So let's let the brain, the artificial intelligence, review the imagery, and that's a good start. Because what that's going to do is it's going to bookmark the files for you that it found that it's high, low, or uncertain. So you could start with your CSA high stuff, and here's all the files that it found, that the artificial intelligence found when it processed the case. These are obviously just training files, but you can use that as a starting point. Now, a tip I want to show you: use the brain. Let it find some CSA for you, right? Then you find one image. If you right-click, we talked about right-click, check this out. Filter on files in same folder as the selected file. I want to see all the other stuff that's in that same folder as the one that the brain found. And that's a good way to start showing all the imagery that is related to that image. Related to that, before I forget, under filters is my favorite filter under intelligence. At the very bottom, it's called unknown files and illegal folders. What this filter will do is it will display for me and filter all my case data to just uncategorized files that live in the same folder as an illegal file. And an illegal file is defined in your settings button under categories. So for this purposes, illegal is what we have considered child use material. You can set this however you want, but that's a great way to find imagery that lives with other imagery, because that's where there's smoke, there's fire, is that theory. So when we're getting ready to categorize our file, we'll get the brain to get us started. But to set it up properly, what I like to do is go over to my categorization settings, and there's a couple settings here. Tristan, if you want to talk about what these two settings are going to do for us, and I'll explain how to use them.
Yeah, sure. The first one at the top, hide thumbnail after categorization. Basically, what that's going to do, it's going to give you some motivation that you're actually working through the job. So as you go down through the pictures or movies you're doing here, whether you select one or you select multiple files by holding down Shift or Control, once you've selected some files, or sweeping with the mouse as Eric's just done, as you select multiple files and you actually categorize them, they're going to disappear from view. So you're honing in on stuff that you are interested in or not interested in. It worked in my mind. It works very well when you're going down and getting rid of impertinent files, or alternatively going down, finding the pictures that are relevant, that are illegal in your case, getting rid of all of those first, and then having looked at everything, you can then select everything that's left and actually put those as impertinent or ignorable.
Now, when Tristan says select everything that's left, my workflow was always, I would go through, just like he said, and I would pick out the 2s and the 1s, all the child exploitation, and having it set to hide thumbnails after categorization leaves me with what I believe to be just non-pertinent files left. So how do I select all the files? Very easy. Control A. What's the problem with Control A? I have selected files that I haven't even seen. I potentially have selected files I haven't looked at. So I always say be careful with Control A. My recommendation is the next one, which is what is called Quick Set category. Tristan?
Yeah, so quick set category, it starts off as being set to uncategorized for a very good reason, that in case you accidentally, you're not sure what you're doing, you hit the default key for it, which is the plus key. But basically what that will do is everything that's visible on the screen with one single hit of a key on the keyboard, and by default it's the plus key, it will change the categories to everything you can see. So you don't actually have to go and individually select them. If it's visible to you on the screen or partially visible, it will automatically grade those to what you've set that quick set to. So it's a very, very quick way of going down a screen. As you see here, we have a fairly small screen space on here. Yeah. And we have 12 pictures displayed at a time. But it's a quick way of going down through. So similar to, in effect, hitting the page down key on thumbnails, but it's basically doing page down and categorizing to non-pertinent with one key press, which is a very quick and efficient way of doing it.
One clarification on that. It will not categorize anything that is partially visible. It'll only categorize fully visible thumbnails, which is a good thing for me because I don't want it to categorize a file that I may not have the full view of. So again, it's about making sure you have eyes on whatever you're going to categorize. And again, I'm just hitting the plus key and you can see it flash. There's all the ones and it just disappeared. They just disappeared. Now, if I had it set so it doesn't hide my thumbnails after categorization and I hit the plus key, it actually, if you watch my scroll bar right there, it actually just scrolls down. And if I scroll back up, I can see all the non-pertinent files that I've created. Much better to use Quickset, in my opinion, than just scrolling through it and hitting Control A, because you don't want to be categorizing files that you don't, you haven't put eyes on. So now that we're talking about, all right, that's kind of a categorization technique. Let's talk a little bit about filters. Now, there's a lot of comprehensive filters, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but a couple that I wanted to point out. The first one is your Work Smart filter. A lot of people aren't aware of this. It is a way that you can go work through your large groups of files kind of in an organized way. And the way you would do it is you click the down arrow, and you can set this to ignore categorized files. If you just want the results to be uncategorized, because that's what you're worried about, you would select that box. I'm going to unselect it for these purposes. And what it's going to do is it's going to start displaying for you, when you hit the Work Smart filter, each group starting with the largest and then working its way down to the smallest. What do I mean by that? I'm going to select files from same camera. So that's what the Work Smart filter is set to. To see what I'm doing, I'm going to go to my EXIF filter and camera serial number, and you'll see that I have nothing filtered. It's all the camera serial numbers that exist, but nothing's checked. Now, it's set to files from same camera. So now when I hit the light bulb, it just filtered down to the largest group of files that have the same serial number, which happens to be this 188 ending with 753, and there's 50 of them. so I can do whatever work I need to do here. Now, when I hit it again, it's going to find the next smallest group. And there it is, 36 files. And that's how it's going to work through. And don't forget, you can set this to, look at this, folders with illegal files. That's a pretty cool one too. So if I click that, I've got to clear my filter, sorry. If I hit folders with illegal files, this is the largest group. This is the folder that contains the largest amount of files and illegal files. So that's a great starting point to find all your imagery there. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about was, let me open up another tab, which is, this is a new feature that some of the guys on the development team, guys and gals on the development team, have been working on to improve our mapping of GPS. So this is really cool. In this case right now I've opened up, it is a bunch of photographs I've taken of my travels in the last couple of years throughout the world, photos and videos. Now, what I can do with this is, which is really cool, is I can go to my EXIF filters and open up my date dialog. They've changed it so it's now visual. So I can create like a little area. Well, first of all, it's giving me kind of a histogram of where all the photographs have been taken. So I can see there was a bunch of pictures taken right here. But if you grab these little bars here, I can create a date range, right? So I got a date range of about a week or so. And as I drag it, now all I can do is click in the middle. And as I drag it to a new set of dates, it filters to what's going on in those dates. And here's a bunch of pictures of my dog at home. I keep going. Oh, there's nothing in that one. More of my dog, and boom, now I'm starting to travel. And you see now I'm in a different place. But where am I? Close this out, and I click on this button. I can bring it up in my GPS dialog and show me exactly where I was at that time. But that is a really handy feature that you can now filter to segments of time in real time. And again, this is your based on your GPS date, or excuse me, your create date within EXIF. And you can see here, you got a case where someone's moving around the country. There you go, right there. It's pretty cool. The other thing about filters that I wanted to talk about is you can create complex filters. If you're going to use a filter more than once, like, let's say you have a particular kind of filter that you like. I have created this one. It's called Apple High Res with GPS. So all I did was I went and I set the filter. The easiest way to do it, you can use the filter editor by hitting new and starting from scratch. If you have no filters, you can start from scratch. But the easiest way is go and set, oh, excuse me, I'm on the wrong case. No wonder I'm not getting what I thought. You can go to your filter editor go to your filters and set the filter you want. For this, I just want pictures that are taken with a Canon camera. Make sure I'm not on Canon camera that have a serial number and are high resolution. Because remember, when you're thinking about victim ID work, you want to think about any first generation material they're producing is probably going to be high resolution. These cameras we have nowadays are taking big pictures, and they're typically reduced before they're sent out on the internet. So if I want to see what this guy's creating, I'm going to assume I found a Canon camera or a bunch of Canon cameras at his house, and I want to see what pictures he's been taking with them. So I'm going to set this to, not file size, but I'm going to set it to picture video width, and I'm going to say 4,000 pixels or higher. I just want to see all the files that were taken with a Canon camera that have a serial number and are larger than 4,000 pixels, right? So I've just created a complex filter. I got 3 items. I want to save that for later because I use it all the time. All I have to do is click save, and it comes up. There's my filter, and I can just save it as Canon high res serial number and hit OK. And that has just added it to my list of whatever I want to open this up with. So Canon high res. Now if I clear my filters and I just want to I want to open up and look at that filter I've made, just boom, open that up, and I just filtered it to all those 3 categories in one. One of the things that people have been discussing is, especially in the UK, Tristan, is inaccessible and accessible files, and being able to show that the person actually had access to those files. One way you can do that, it's not super intuitive because depending on the operating system and depending on the user's permissions, they may or may not have access to files, and that could vary from case to case. So if you have a set of files or folder structures that you know are typically user inaccessible, let's say, for example, this source 3 is user inaccessible, and I want to save that as a filter. So I can say, show me the inaccessible files. I can filter to it and then hit my save. So pick whatever is an inaccessible file folder or folder path, and then filter to it and click save. And you can just title it inaccessible temp folder or whatever, something like that, and then save it. And then you can just go back through here and you can create a complex filter that it will filter to all the different folders that you feel are accessible or inaccessible. That's one way to tackle that accessibility or inaccessibility issue. Any comments on that, Tristan?
What's really good with those filters, again, I had a set of filters for exactly that issue. You know, when you create those filters, you have access to everything that's basically within the grid view. So you can say that only show me pictures where in the path of the path of the file name, or the file name path, the word thumb cache appears. Or doesn't appear, for example. So you need to know a little bit about the way the operating systems work and where files are. But if the file path contains thumb cache, then on a Windows system, you're going to have files that are from the thumbnail, the thumb caches on the drive, which generally are regarded in the UK as not accessible files. So it really is down to your imagination how you filter with stuff, everything you can see pretty much in grid view, and how you can filter down to actually the bits of information you want or you want to exclude.
Absolutely. Excellent. All right, now let's talk a little bit about searching. This is a very powerful tool, and there's lots of different ways to search for things, and I'm obviously not going to go into that, all the different ways today, but a couple tips for you is, number one, you can bring in external imagery and search your case for that external image data. So for example, I want to bring in let's say I want to bring in a picture of, I want to bring in a photograph of, let's see, let's say this dog. I want to see if there's a picture of this dog in the case somewhere. I just go to it and boom, it's going to give me any similar imagery, and boom, there I just found another picture of her right there doing the similarity search, bringing an external image in. Now, another reason you might want to do that is to bring in your search warrant photographs, to bring in search warrant imagery to see if there's any images that were taken within the same house. This case, it doesn't look to be such. The other trick I wanted to tell you is not only can you bring in external images and run similarity searches, but if you change your search method, you could potentially look for visual copies using PhotoDNA. I know I used to get a lot of cases where the reported image, whoever reported it to NCMEC took a photograph of their computer monitor, and it has the picture in it that they're talking about. Now, you can certainly run a similarity search within the tool, but what I recommend before you do that is you crop that photograph with any of the frame of the monitor that they took the photograph on. So get it to where it's just the picture, and then run the similarity search. Because remember, it's going to be using shape and context, contours in the image. And if you have the framework for a monitor, it's going to look for images in your case with that framework. So make sure you remove that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was being able to bring in faces. So not only is there face detection within the tool that works amazing, but you can bring in an external face to see if there's any imagery in the case of that particular person. So let's say you have a bad guy, you've done a search warrant, and you have a bad guy, and you want to see if there's any images of that bad guy in your case. So I'm going to select this bad guy. He looks like a pretty shady character, and I'm going to click open. And it's going to run a similarity search, a similar faces search, and it's going to return, including video, all the images where my face appears. Excuse me, did I say my face? I meant this bad guy's face. But as you can see, it does a pretty good job of running that externally. Not only with your suspects, but you can also do that with your victims. But remember, when you do that to change your search method to similar faces. So I'm going to click add, and I'm going to run a picture for this victim, my lovely daughter. And here's all the results. So use that face detection. Now, talking about searching, you can filter your search results. As you'll notice right here, there's at the top, there's a thumbnail view and a grid view of just your search results, which are 100. Now, I can filter this data. Let's say there's a bunch of pictures on here, but I want to filter it down. I want to get rid of, I just want to see all the uncategorized files, because I noticed in my search results there's a bunch of non-pertinents. I don't want those. I can just go up here to filter search results. Oops, excuse me. And I'm going to filter to, now this, you can filter you can filter by category within this tool here, but in the main program, you have to do it in the categorization panel. So I just want the uncategorized results. I've just filtered my search results, not my main filter. Again, this is a filter specific to my search results, and you'll see there's a little red X right there if I want to clear it. But I have now filtered my results down to just, now you can further refine that if you want. Hey, I'm just looking for videos. Just show me the video files, and boom, there's the video files. So this is, again, just filtering your search results to make your workflow that much better. And then don't forget, you can still, from within your search results, you can perform all the same functions you can perform from the thumbnail view. If I want to see this, where this video was taken on a map, I can click that, and boom, there it is. And sure enough, it was taken in Hyde Park. We were walking around through there, or the bad guy was, excuse me, was walking around in Hyde Park. But you can perform those same functions on right within the thumbnail view. Excuse me, the search view. All right, let's talk about just a couple more items, and we'll finish this off. But I'm going to talk a little bit about video files, since we're speaking about that. A couple things that have to do with video. Workflow, obviously, if you do frame extraction on the way in, you can quickly exclude files by basically watching the frame extractions by hovering through them, which is a pretty common or well-known tip. But one thing I wanted to bring out, not only do we have face detection available, remember, within Griffeye Analyze, but so I want to see one thing, kind of a trick here is I see two people in this video, but I want to make sure quickly that there's not other people in this video that Griffeye has detected. I can go up to my filters. Remember, in your video, you have the ability to filter your videos for several criteria. Motion for surveillance videos, you can show me just parts of the video with motion, sound, nudity, and face. So if I do face detection, when I select this, if you watch the timeline underneath the video player, you'll see that parts of it gray out where the face isn't detected. Now, when I play it, it's going to skip over that using the filtered play button. It'll skip over anything that I filtered out. But a quick trick is, if I want to find all the faces that it detected in this video, I can just go down to specific faces. And now I see that it has detected just these two faces. Now, let me grab this other video, the one of us people walking through Hyde Park. And where is it? There it is. Now this video, it appears that my subject matter, there's just 3 of them. Okay, that's good. But I want to see if there's any, quickly want to identify if there's other faces found. I go up to my filters, face, specific faces, and lo and behold, it's showing Zoe and Chris, my wife and daughter, and it's also showing me. It's telling me that it's somewhere in this video that face shows up. And then I could filter it to just where that face is. Notice it's grayed out the entire video except for the end where my face pops up. That's kind of a pretty cool way to be able to filter things. Another tip that people aren't really super aware of is the ability to step through video. So if I want to step through this video, I have these little arrow buttons, but again, we're talking about shortcut keys and stuff like that. I can arrow through the video and it'll frame me through back and forward, but I can also hover over it and use my mouse wheel to perform the same function. So I'm just using my mouse wheel to scrabble back and forth. And remember, I can also run face detection from within here, from within the tool. I could run that if I wanted to. Sorry. But just realize that there's some player control functions that you can handle with the mouse and keyboard. And remember, it's going to do scene detection as well, and your scene detection can be adjusted down here at the bottom. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about reporting. So when we're ready to generate a report, some of the cool features that they've added, which to me is fantastic. If you have a file that has multiple copies stacked in the thumbnail view, files stacked in the thumbnail view, and you want to just report on one. Let's say, for example, like Tristan was talking about before, you have a file that's inaccessible in a stack of visually similar files or binary copies or whatever that you don't want to report on. You just want to report on the main image, the one that's found in his documents folder. So what you would do is you'd select the image, you go over to your Files tab, and you would select whichever image you want to report on. You right-click and say Prioritize in File List Report. When you do that, it's going to make whichever file you selected bold. That's going to be the file that you're going to report on when you go to your reporting engine and you go create a report. Excuse me, Peter Brady moment. When you go to create a report, right here you'll see it says exclude binary and visual copies. If you do that, only the file on top of the thumbnail stack or the one which is the one you've prioritized will be reported. So when you create your report, if you want to report on just one image instead of a list of 6 or a list of 8, however many copies there are, that's how you would select, that's how you would do it. And when you create that, it's going to create a file list report of just those main images, which is a fantastic addition that people have been asking for a little bit of time. That is reporting. So Tristan, any other thoughts on workflows, techniques that we want to talk about?
The one thing that springs to mind, again from past experiences, is if you start looking through pictures and things and you find something that you think may be relevant in the slightest way, I would always create a bookmark, because bookmarks are case specific. Create a bookmark with files of interest. I will have that on every single case in the template. And possible files of interest, and I will put it in there, because a number of times I've been through cases and it's not until near the end I thought, damn, that's relevant now, and it takes hours and hours and hours to find it. If you see it, you think it's relevant, just bookmark it, create a bookmark. It's easy to come back and find it. And that was a key tip. I've wasted an awful lot of time in the past trying to find things that I've seen in the case and can't find it again.
Excellent. So one of the other things, since we're talking about bookmarks, one of the other things that someone else had talked about is, if you want to not use bookmarks, if you just want to look through things real quickly and put a pin in them because they're of interest and you want to come back to them, you can use what's called representative files. And representative files is the blue push pin up at the top. It's a way to add intelligence, but it's either representative or it's not. So if I select this file and I say it's representative, this is of interest representative, like he said, and then you're going down and you're scrolling through, oh, boom, this is important. I just want to make it representative. This one, same thing. That's an important file. Now, what you can do is you can see over here on your, it's incrementing how many files I have set as representative. Now, if I want to just show me those, I can go to representative files, and there's all the ones that I flagged. So representative files is kind of used as a temporary holding pattern, just like using that bookmark. The cool thing for this is when you're done and you just want to get rid of all these representative files, you just go to your case data tab and hit clear representative, and it'll just clear everything. And now you're back to, when you go back to the thumbnail view, you're good to go. Excuse me. Yeah, so now something I want to touch on that Tristan mentioned is he always has a file of interest. He always has a file of interest bookmark set up when he starts a case. Now, you can create your own bookmark structure from within the case. The easiest way to do it is to set these bookmarks up how you want them on your first case. I recommend you don't run any plugins, you don't run the Brain plugins, because that's going to create this massive set of bookmarks. So before you create these, create the bookmarks that you're going to use in every investigation. Then you can go back to the File tab or the Overview window under your bookmark settings. And whatever structure you've set up in your case that you want to use on every case, you just go here and there's this button said Set Case Bookmarks as Default. And when I do that, it's going to load the bookmarks that I've set up in my case as the default one. So the next time I open up a case, it's going to remember all those bookmarks that I've set up. And that's, I'm pretty sure that's how Tristan set up his, so
Exactly.
so that they come back every time. Now,
Exactly.
another thing that now let's talk about some workflow stuff. Let's talk some pure categorization. One thing I wanted to talk about was when I would categorize, when I'm sitting down, I think the last case I did had 1.2 million images, and with stacking, it was about 500,000. So if I'm sitting down in front of 500,000 files, and I know I have to go through all of them, that's like sitting at the base of the Empire State Building and saying, I have to walk all the way up to the Empire State Building. But if you tell yourself, I'm just going to walk up 2 floors, take a quick coffee break, and then walk up another 2 floors, take another coffee break because I'm completely out of shape. Some of you may make it 10 stories. But the point is give yourself little wins. And the way I do that, and Tristan may have a different suggestion, but the way I would do that is I would first start off when I'm ready to categorize. I'd go over to my, and I would filter to uncategorized files. That's all I want to look at is uncategorized files. I go over to my filters, and I would start with pictures first. Just do pictures. Don't try to mix pictures and videos because it's 2 completely different ways you handle each one of those files. So I do my images first, and then when I'm done, I do my pictures. But I'm going to break my images into file size groups to make it easier. Typically, I'll find the ones with the smallest amount of files and just knock those out. Categorize all those and then move on to the next one. Or you can start from smaller to bigger, and you can just kind of knock them out. And then each time you finish that size group, it gives you that little boom, I got that one done, on to the next one. It's kind of a psychological way to get through small chunks. Then I'll switch to my video files, and I'll categorize, I'll go through and I'll do all the video categorization as well. That's kind of the way to chunk it up. Now, another thing that you might want to do, if you want to start excluding crap imagery, right? You want to start getting rid of those icons that didn't get picked up in your GID or in your NIST database. Head over to your file extensions and start looking at some file extensions that are typically known for not containing child exploitation. Now, again, this isn't 100%. Some people have PNGs out there with child exploitation, but a lot of portable network graphic files are web stuff that developers use all the time. So let's get rid of those. I'm going to go to my PNGs, and when I do that, I'm over filtered. Let me actually, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to clear everything not uncategorized because these are all categorized. But let's say you come across this file, you filter to PNGs, you come across it, and you're like, you know what? I want to find all the ones that look just like it so I can get rid of those and categorize them as well. I find the file, select it, hit enter, and now in my similarity search, I found all these additional files, and I can just do, I can just then categorize them as well. I can go back then and then find another one of these PNGs and find all the similar ones related to that. Knock all those out. Very important to get that done. Get rid of the garbage so you can start working on what's important. Tristan?
I couldn't agree more. That the more you can group files together that are very, very similar visually, the easier it is for the human brain to notice if there's something different there. So you can go through pages, thousands of pictures very, very quickly. If they are all green arrows, anything that's not a green arrow will jump out at you. And again, as Eric says, PNGs are a great one. Computers have thousands and thousands of them generally. Knock all those things out very quickly, and you very, very quickly see that the number of pictures that you've got left diminishes very quickly. And what you actually have to start looking at closely, like the pictures on the screen at the moment, the photographs and things like that, you have to look at a little bit more detail. You can spend a bit more time, but get rid of the bulk of stuff first if you can, if you've got that sort of job where you're not focused on finding evidence as quickly as possible. Absolutely.
Excellent. And that just made me think of another point that I wanted to discuss. If you are looking for files that are related imagery-wise, so let's say a series, you're looking for files that are part of a known series. How do I identify all the images that contain a known series? How do I get them all together? Well, I want to use 2 different functions to make sure I'm getting as much information as I can. The first is my similarity search, clearly. I select the file and hit enter, and it's going to give me all these additional search results. But the other thing I can do is in conjunction, so I would find all these and I would bookmark them and I'd add them to whatever series if that was what I was doing, or I would group them together by a bookmark or a series or whatever. But I want to make sure I'm finding all the files. So not only using similarity search, but I'm also going to bring this up and I'm going to run face detection as well to make sure that I'm grabbing, because similarity search, remember, it's context, it's the backgrounds, it's contours, things like that. So if the person, you want to connect people and locations. So if I want to find images of this woman because she's one of my victims, I want to find the other images of her in other settings where similarity search won't pick that up. I can run face detection in conjunction with my similarity searching, and I can bookmark the files right from within here or whatever. So use the tools to get you to what you want to get to. Another one that people aren't super aware of, and Tristan just mentioned this, it's all about grouping files together that are like. One way to do that is to use our relationship searching. So not only can we do a similarity search, we can do relationship searching, and we would right click to get our search set up and hit relation search settings, and we can just group these files by whatever whatever categories, or not categories, bad choice of words, whatever file information we want to group them by. Let's say we want all the files within the same GPS range of a particular image, we would set that. So I just want to see that. So I'm basically going to set up a relationship search for files that's grouped. Now I've got my settings set just within the same GPS range. Now let me clear my filters, and I'm going to go back to this camera model, and I'm going to say 1+. And here's an image with GPS. So now I want to run a relationship search. I can right click and say search relationship, or I can do Shift Enter. Shift Enter is going to run a relationship search. And as you can see, it's now showing me all the files that were taken within the same GPS that I set, or that was set by default, which was 1 mile. And that's going to change on whatever jurisdiction you're in. But I can always go back and change my relation search settings if I want to add something, perhaps same resolution and same folder, let's say. And I can go back and I can run that same relationship search, again, search relationship. And now it's given me back even more results. So just realize that, use these tools to get your groups of files together. That's where the meat and potatoes are, is when you start taking all the different functions and you combine them to get you to the evidence that you're interested in. All right, Tristan, any other workflow suggestions, ideas before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think so. Anything from me?
Excellent. All right, well, we certainly appreciate everybody who viewed this today. And again, if you are viewing this as a result of missing the webinar on October 23rd because of the technical issue with not being able to share a screen, we apologize again. Hopefully this was a little more informative, and we look forward to you viewing some of our upcoming webinars. So from us, I'd like to say goodbye and happy Analyze DIing. And I really, really think that if you start to use the functions that are in the tool that might not be readily apparent, when you start using these little tips and tricks, it just puts your investigative time really, it takes it down. So it kind of puts your investigative speed on steroids so you can really get through stuff. Again, it's not always about speed, but use the items in the tool to group the files so then you can add your intelligence, do your other things. Use built-in functions. All right. Thank you guys so much, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Goodbye.